When civilizations fall silent, the great crystal amphitheater of Nexus Station had never hosted such desperation. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their hoverpods, their faces showing the same terrible fear that had spread through civilized space like a plague. The air itself seemed heavy with the weight of impending extinction. Ambassador Thyra Velenus of the Zephyrian Republic clutched her datapad with trembling hands. The elegant blue-skinned diplomat had served the Galactic Harmony Alliance for over 3 centuries, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. Around her, beings from 200 different worlds struggled to maintain their composure as they faced the end of everything they had ever known. "The Kepler sector has gone silent," announced Prime Nexus, the AI collective that served as the Alliance's central intelligence. Its holographic form flickered with distress patterns that hurt to look at. That brings the total to 47 star systems in just 6 months. Every probe we send disappears. Every communication stops. Every trace of life simply ends. General Krax of the militant hegemony slammed his armored fist against his console. His warrior species had never known defeat, but even their pride was cracking under the weight of helplessness. How do we fight an enemy we cannot see? How do we defend against something that leaves no trace? The main display showed the galaxy, map with growing patches of absolute darkness. These weren't empty spaces or destroyed systems. They were voids where matter itself seemed to have been drained away. The Silence Makers, as they had come to be known, left behind regions where even starlight couldn't penetrate. Dr. Zenth of the Crystalline Collective raised, her singing voice above the murmur of panic. Her people were living gems who had mastered energy manipulation on a quantum level. "We have attempted every known form of communication. Radio, quantum entanglement, psionic projection, even temporal messaging. The response is always the same: nothing. These entities do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They simply consume." Thyra accessed her files with growing desperation. The Zephyrian Republic had been one of the founding members of the Alliance, dedicated to peaceful exploration and cultural exchange. Her people had spent millennia building bridges between species, finding common ground where others saw only differences. But there was no common ground with extinction itself. "What about the old weapons?" asked Commander Vex of the Biosymbiotic Union. His living ship pulsed with bioluminescent worry patterns. The planet crackers, the star killers, the reality bombs from the Omega Wars. Prime Nexus's form shifted to display weapon schematics that made several delegates flinch. All theoretical deployments result in the same outcome. The Silence Makers absorb energy attacks and convert kinetic weapons into more of themselves. "We are not fighting a military force. We are fighting a natural disaster that has gained intelligence." The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. Elder Mirth of the Contemplative Order rarely spoke at council meetings, preferring to observe and meditate. When she did speak, her words carried the weight of ancient wisdom.
"Ooh.
"There is one option we have not discussed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Soul Quarantine Zone." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Delegates began shouting in dozens of languages, their translation devices struggling to keep up with the overlapping voices of outrage, fear, and desperate hope. "The humans are monsters," shrieked Representative Quillen of the Peaceful Gardeners. "We quarantine them for good reason. They're Deathworlders," added General Krax, though his tone carried a note of speculation rather than disgust. "Their entire planet is a nightmare of violence and predation." Prime Nexus projected statistical data that made several delegates sick. Species classification: Homo sapiens sapiens. Origin world: Earth, Sol system. Classification: Apex predator, level 9 Deathworld survivor. Quarantine status: absolute. Reason for quarantine: extreme violence potential and reality-altering technological development. Thyra studied the data with growing amazement. She had heard stories about the Sol system, whispered tales that were usually dismissed as propaganda or fiction. According to the files, humanity had been contacted once, nearly 500 years ago. The results had been so disturbing that the entire system had been surrounded by warning beacons and declared off-limits to all galactic civilization. They survived their own planet trying to kill them, Elder Mirth continued calmly. They turned predation into cooperation, weaponized their own extinction instincts. If anyone can stop the Silence Makers, it would be a species that has already survived the unsurvivable. The debate raged for hours. Some delegates argued that contacting the humans violated every principle of galactic law. Others pointed out that galactic law would be meaningless if there was no galaxy left to govern. The militant hegemony was surprisingly supportive of the idea, recognizing a fellow warrior culture. The peaceful gardeners threatened to withdraw from the alliance entirely. In the end, desperation won over principle. The vote was close, but decisive. They would send an envoy to the Sol system and request humanity's aid in fighting the Silence Makers. The question then became, who would volunteer for what was essentially a suicide mission? The humans had been isolated for good reason. There were stories of ships that approached the Sol system returning with their crews fundamentally changed. Speaking of technologies that shouldn't exist and philosophies that challenged the very nature of reality. "I'll go," Thyra said, surprising herself with her own words. The Zephyrians have always been diplomats. If anyone can make peaceful contact with the humans, it's one of us. The journey to Sol took 3 weeks aboard the fastest ship in the Alliance fleet. Thyra spent the time studying every scrap of information about humanity, though most of it read like horror stories designed to frighten children. Humans were supposed to be violent, unpredictable, and dangerously intelligent. They came from a world where everything was trying to kill them, and they had responded by becoming the most efficient killers in the galaxy. What disturbed Thyra most were the psychological profiles. Human minds worked differently from any other known species. They were capable of extraordinary empathy and devastating cruelty, sometimes simultaneously. They formed bonds with other species while also being perfectly willing to exterminate them if necessary. They were contradictions wrapped in flesh and guided by emotions that defied logical analysis. As her ship approached the edge of the Sol system, Thyra began to understand why the quarantine existed. The warning beacons were impossible to ignore, broadcasting in every known language and several that weren't. They all carried the same message: danger. Apex predator species. Approach forbidden. Authorized personnel only. Violation will result in permanent consequences. What made the warnings truly terrifying was their age. They had been broadcasting for 5 centuries without any sign of technological degradation. Either the humans had built monuments to last millennia, or they were actively maintaining the beacons from a distance that should have been impossible. "Unknown vessel, you are entering restricted space," came a voice that made Thyra's blood freeze. The transmission was in perfect Galactic standard, but there was something wrong with it. The speaker sounded human, but also somehow more than human. "State your business, or withdraw immediately." "This is Ambassador Thyra Velenus of the Galactic Harmony Alliance," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "They carry an urgent message for the human government. Our civilization is facing extinction, and we request an audience." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. When the voice returned, it carried a note of something that might have been amusement. "Ambassador, please, adjust your trajectory to follow the guidance beacons. You will be escorted to Luna Station for initial processing. Be advised that you are entering a reality-controlled zone. Your ship's instruments may behave unexpectedly." As Thyra followed the guidance signals deeper into the Sol system, she began to understand what the voice had meant. Her ship's sensors were giving impossible readings. According to her instruments, some of the planets in the system were in multiple locations simultaneously. The asteroid belt appeared to be both present and absent depending on which scanner she used. Everywhere she looked, there were structures that her mind refused to accept as real. The humans hadn't just survived in their quarantine, they had transcended it. They had built an entire civilization that existed partially outside normal space-time, using technologies that made the Alliance's greatest achievements look like stone tools. Luna Station appeared on her screens like a crystalline flower blooming in the darkness. It was beautiful in a way that made her want to cry and run away at the same time. The structure seemed to be made of solidified starlight and crystallized time, defying every law of physics she knew. "Welcome to Soul Space, Ambassador came," the voice again as her ship was gently guided into a docking bay that was somehow larger inside than outside. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I'll be handling your initial briefing." When Thyra finally met the human face to face, she was struck by how normal Sarah Chen appeared. She was a woman of average height, with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a simple uniform that could have belonged to any military organization in the galaxy. Not for the subtle wrongness in the way space bent around her, Thyra might have mistaken her for any other humanoid species. "Ambassador," Sarah said with a warm smile. "We've been monitoring the situation in the galaxy." The silence. "Makers are indeed a serious threat. We've been wondering when someone would finally ask for our help." "You've been watching?" Thyra asked, surprised. "But the quarantine was put in place to protect you, not to contain us," Sarah replied gently. "We've been observing galactic civilization for centuries, learning about your cultures, your strengths, and your limitations. We've always hoped that someday we might be able to help our neighbors, but we knew that our assistance would have to be requested rather than imposed." Sarah led Thyra through corridors that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. "The silence makers are not from this reality," the human explained. "They're entropy feeders from a universe where the laws of physics are fundamentally different. They consume ordered energy and convert it into chaos. In their home reality, this is a natural part of the cosmic cycle. In ours, it's an extinction event. Can you stop them?" Adara asked. Though she was afraid of the answer, Sarah paused at a window that looked out onto what appeared to be a garden floating in space, complete with trees, grass, and a small stream that flowed upward in a spiral pattern. "We can end the threat permanently," she said. "But you need to understand what that means. Once we act, there's no going back. The galaxy will be safe, but it will also be fundamentally changed. We don't just win wars, Ambassador. We reshape reality to prevent them from happening again." As they reached the briefing room, Thyra found herself facing a panel of humans who radiated an aura of casual competence that was more terrifying than any display of weaponry. These were beings who had looked at the impossible and made it routine. They had taken the worst planet in the galaxy and turned it into a launching pad for transcendence. "The Galactic Harmony Alliance formally requests your assistance," Thyra said, delivering the message she had rehearsed thousands of times during her journey. "We offer whatever payment you deem appropriate in exchange for your help in stopping the silence makers." The lead human, a woman who introduced herself as Director Elena Vasquez, smiled with genuine warmth. "Ambassador, we don't want payment. We want partnership. If we're going to save the galaxy, we're going to do it properly. So that means not just stopping the current threat, but preventing future ones. It means establishing a new order based on protection rather than competition." "What exactly are you proposing?" Thyra asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The Mercy Protocol," Director Vasquez replied. "Complete reorganization of galactic civilization under human guidance. An end to warfare, hunger, and extinction level threats. A golden age of peace and prosperity that will last for millions of years." The words sounded beautiful, but Thyra couldn't shake the feeling that she was being offered a choice between slavery and death. The humans were clearly powerful enough to enforce their will across the entire galaxy. The question was whether their version of mercy would be something her people could live with. "How long do we have to decide?" she asked. "The silence makers will reach the galactic core in approximately 4 months, Captain Chen replied. "We can have our fleet in position within 3. It gives us a month to prepare for what comes after." As Thyra was escorted to guest quarters that existed in a pocket dimension designed specifically for her biological needs, she reflected on the magnitude of what was happening. The galaxy had asked for salvation and received an offer of transformation. Whether that transformation would be a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. Outside her window, she could see human ships preparing for deployment. They moved like living things, flowing and changing shape as they prepared for a war that would determine the fate of every sentient being in the galaxy. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder that humanity's idea of mercy might be very different from what the rest of the galaxy expected. The die had been cast. The humans were coming to save them all, what Deathworlders consider Mercy the Terran Fleet Assembly. A point existed in a fold of space-time that hurt to contemplate. Admiral Marcus Steele stood on the command deck of the TES Inevitable, watching as humanity's most advanced warships gathered for the largest military operation in their species' history. Each vessel was a masterpiece of technology that existed partially outside normal reality, their hulls shifting between dimensions as they prepared for combat. "Final count, Admiral," reported Commander Lisa Park from her station at the tactical display. 212 vessels of the line, 57 support craft, and 12 reality anchors. All ships report ready for deployment. Steele nodded. As he studied the fleet readouts, each ship represented decades of research into physics that most galactic species couldn't even comprehend. The humans had spent their centuries of isolation well, pushing the boundaries of science and technology until they had learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of existence itself. Dr. Elena Vasquez materialized beside him, her form solidifying from quantum probability into physical reality. As the lead scientist of the Mercy Protocol, she had undergone modifications that allowed her to exist in multiple states simultaneously. To most observers, she appeared to be a normal human woman. To those with the proper sensors, she registered as a walking violation of causality. "The dimensional mapping is complete," she reported, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested she was speaking from several different timelines at once. "We've identified the source of the Silence Maker's incursion. They're entering our reality through a weakness in space-time near the galactic core, specifically in the region the locals call the Void Nexus." Steele studied the holographic display that showed the galaxy with annotations in 4 dimensions. The Silence Makers weren't just attacking random systems. They were following a pattern that led directly to the most densely populated regions of galactic civilization. It was almost as if they were being guided by intelligence rather than instinct. "Assessment of enemy capabilities?" he asked. "Troubling," Dr. Vasquez admitted. "They're not just consuming matter and energy. They're consuming the information that defines how matter and energy behave. When they attack a system, they don't just destroy it. They make it never have existed in the first place. The fact that we can still remember the destroyed systems means they haven't learned to attack memory itself yet." The implications were staggering. An enemy that could edit reality itself, removing not just objects, but the very concepts that allowed those objects to exist. It was the kind of threat that most species would consider beyond their ability to comprehend, let alone combat. Fortunately, Dr. Vasquez continued with a smile that would have terrified most sentient beings. "We've learned a few tricks about reality manipulation ourselves." Steele turned to address the fleet communication system, his voice carried instantly to every ship in the Armada. "All vessels, this is Admiral Steele. In approximately 6 hours, we will begin the most important mission in human history. We are not just defending our neighbors from extinction. We are establishing humanity's role as the guardians of galactic civilization." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Every crew member in the fleet had volunteered for this mission, knowing that they might not return, and that if they did return, they would be fundamentally changed by what they had seen and done. "The enemy we face operates outside the normal laws of physics," he continued. "They consume reality itself, turning order into chaos and existence into void. But they have made a critical error. They have entered a universe where humanity learned to thrive in chaos, where we turned adversity into strength, where we discovered that the laws of physics are merely suggestions to be rewritten when necessary." On the bridge of the Taze Paradox, Captain Jennifer Walsh watched her crew make final preparations for combat. Her ship was one of the newest in the fleet, equipped with temporal displacement drives and causality weapons that could attack enemies before they decided to become hostile. The crew worked with the easy competence of beings who had trained for scenarios that most minds couldn't grasp. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the science station, "we're detecting probability fluctuations in Sector 7. The Silence Makers are accelerating their advance. They'll reach the Harmony Alliance core worlds in 3 weeks instead of 4 months. Walsh nodded calmly. She had expected this development. The enemy was responding to the presence of the human fleet, recognizing a genuine threat for the first time since entering their reality. It was going to be a race between human preparation and alien hunger. "Signal Admiral Steele," she ordered. "Recommend immediate deployment to defensive positions. We can complete our preparations in combat." Across the fleet, similar conversations were taking place. Humans had spent centuries preparing for every possible threat, including enemies that didn't operate within normal space-time. Their ships were equipped with weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics, shields that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and engines that could move through time as easily as space. Ambassador Thyra watched the fleet preparations from the observation deck of the command station. Mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The human ships didn't just move through space. They flowed like liquid thought, changing shape and configuration as they adjusted to different tactical requirements. Some vessels appeared to be in multiple locations at once. Others seemed to exist as pure possibility until the moment they were needed. "It's beautiful and terrifying," she said to Captain Chen, who had been assigned as her liaison during the operation. "That's humanity in general," Chen replied with a slight smile. "We've always been a contradiction. We're capable of incredible compassion and devastating efficiency, sometimes simultaneously. The Mercy Protocol represents both aspects of our nature. What will happen to my people after this is over?" Thyra asked. Voicing the question that had been haunting her since arriving at Seoul, Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching as a squadron of fighters performed maneuvers that involved temporarily ceasing to exist. "That depends on your people," she finally said. "We're not conquerors in the traditional sense. We're gardeners. We create conditions where life can flourish, and we remove threats that would prevent that flourishing. How your people choose to live within those conditions is up to you." "But we won't truly be free," Thyra said. It wasn't a question. "Define freedom?" Chen challenged gently. "Is it the freedom to make choices that lead to extinction? Is it the freedom to wage wars that consume entire star systems? Is it the freedom to watch as reality-eating monsters devour everything you've ever loved because pride prevented you from accepting help?" The human gestured toward the fleet, where preparations were reaching a crescendo of activity. "We could have ignored your request. We could have sealed our borders and let the galaxy burn. Instead, we're about to risk everything to save civilizations that have spent centuries calling us monsters. If that's not freedom, it's something better." Dr. Vasquez's voice echoed through the fleet communication system as she began the final briefing. "All personnel. This is Dr. Vasquez with tactical analysis. The silence makers operate by consuming quantum information and converting it into entropy. They exist partially outside our reality, which makes them difficult to target with. CONVENTIONAL. Weapons. However, we have developed countermeasures." The main display showed a simulation of the upcoming battle, with human ships deploying weapons that looked more like mathematical equations than physical objects. Phase 1 weapons will establish reality anchors around the combat zone, preventing the enemy from editing themselves out of existence. Phase 2 weapons will reverse their quantum state, forcing them to exist entirely within our dimensional framework. Phase 3 weapons will eliminate them using methods I cannot describe in any language that exists. Admiral Steele took over the briefing as the fleet began moving toward the jump points. "Remember, we're not just fighting for victory. We're fighting to establish a new paradigm. When this battle is over, the galaxy will know that humanity stands ready to protect all sentient life from extinctional-level threats. That knowledge will change everything." The jump to the combat zone was unlike anything Thyra had ever experienced. The human ships didn't travel through hyperspace or fold space-time in the conventional sense. They simply decided to be somewhere else, and adjusted reality to accommodate that decision. The journey took 17 minutes to cross half the galaxy, and during that time, Thyra could swear she saw the universe from the outside looking in. When they arrived at the Void Nexus, the scope of the threat became clear. The Silence Makers had consumed an entire globular cluster, leaving behind a region of space where even the concept of distance had been devoured. They were massive entities that existed as living negation, moving through reality like antibodies. Through a diseased organism, enemy contact, reported the tactical officer. Approximately 4,000 entities, each one roughly the size of a small moon. They're beginning to converge on our position. Admiral Steele studied the tactical display. With the calm focus of someone who had planned for this exact scenario, all vessels, implement Protocol 7. Reality anchors to maximum deployment. Prepare to demonstrate why humanity doesn't lose wars. What followed was less a battle than a fundamental restructuring of local space-time. The human fleet moved in patterns that defied three-dimensional thinking. Their weapons firing projectiles that existed as pure concept rather than matter. When the Silence Makers tried to consume the human ships, they found themselves unable to process the information that defined human technology. The first phase of the battle lasted 17 seconds and resulted in the complete restructuring of a cubic light-year of space. When it was over, the Silence Makers found themselves trapped in a reality where their normal abilities no longer functioned. They were forced to exist as physical entities subject to the laws of physics that humanity had chosen to enforce. The second phase lasted 3 minutes and involved weapons that attacked the enemy's existence retroactively, making it so that they had never entered this reality in the first place. The third phase was over before it began, as the remaining Silence Makers were converted into useful energy and distributed throughout the local stellar neighborhood to repair the damage they had caused. All contacts eliminated, reported Commander Park. No human casualties. Local space-time restored to standard parameters. Mission accomplished. But as Admiral Steele looked at the sensor readings showing the complete absence of the threat that had terrorized the galaxy for months, he knew that the easy part was over. Now came the challenge of implementing the Mercy Protocol and establishing humanity's role as the galaxy's permanent guardian. The real war was just beginning when gods walk among mortals. 6 months after the Battle of Void Nexus, the galaxy had settled into what historians would later call the Great Adjustment. Ambassador Thyra sat in her new office on Harmony Station, watching human patrol ships move through space with the casual authority of apex predators in their natural habitat. The view outside her window showed a galaxy that looked the same but felt fundamentally different. The latest reports from the Outer Rim, said her aide, Commander Jexel, placing a data pad on her desk. The human peacekeeping forces have successfully mediated the Crystalline Wars, ended the Bioship Rebellion, and established what they call sustainable conflict resolution in the savage sectors. Thyra reviewed the reports with mixed feelings. The humans had kept their word about establishing peace, but their methods were unsettling in their efficiency. They didn't conquer worlds or destroy governments. Instead, they simply made it impossible for conflicts to continue by removing the conditions that allowed them to exist. How exactly did they end the Crystalline Wars? She asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. They modified the local space-time in the disputed systems, Jexel replied, his voice carefully neutral. Fighting is now physically impossible in that region. When species try to attack each other, their weapons simply cease to function. Apparently, the humans have redefined the laws of physics to exclude violent conflict. Outside her window, one of the human patrol ships was conducting what they called a reality inspection of a passing cargo vessel. The process involved scanning the ship with instruments that could detect everything from hidden weapons to the intentions of the crew members. It was thorough, efficient, and completely impossible to evade. The door chimed, and Captain Chen entered without waiting for permission. This was another change that Thyra was still adjusting to. Humans didn't follow traditional diplomatic protocols because they didn't need to. When you possessed the ability to rewrite reality, etiquette became optional. Ambassador Chen said with her usual warm smile, "I have an update on the implementation of the Protection Accords. The militant hegemony has agreed to convert their war fleets into exploration vessels. The peaceful gardeners have requested human assistance in expanding their agricultural worlds. The Biosymbiotic Union wants to collaborate on life extension research." And if they had refused these suggestions? Thyra asked. Chen's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. They wouldn't have been able to refuse. The accords aren't really agreements, Ambassador. They're statements of reality. The galaxy is now organized according to principles that prevent large-scale suffering and extinction-level threats. Individual choice still exists within those parameters. The euphemistic language didn't disguise the truth. Humanity had imposed their will on the entire galaxy, but they had done it so subtly that most species were convinced they had chosen their new roles freely. It was manipulation on a scale that defied comprehension, carried out by beings who genuinely believed they were helping. The Council of Worlds has requested another meeting, Thyra said, changing the subject. They want to discuss the expansion of human oversight into the inner systems. That's not really their decision to make anymore, Chen replied gently, but we appreciate their input. Human expansion into the inner systems is necessary for maintaining galactic stability. We've identified several potential extinction-level threats that require permanent monitoring. She gestured, and a holographic display showed the galaxy with hundreds of red markers indicating potential problems, according to the human analysis. Almost every developed system contains something that could theoretically threaten galactic civilization if left unchecked. This is what we do, Chen continued, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. We identify problems before they become disasters. We prevent conflicts before they start. We ensure that no species ever again faces the choice between extinction and asking for help from strangers. Later that day, Thyra attended a meeting of the Galactic Coordination Committee, the new governing body that had replaced the old Alliance Council. The committee was technically made up of representatives from every major species, but the human observers who sat in the back of the room were the ones who actually made the decisions. The trade route negotiations for the Spiral Arm Economic Zone, announced Director Kelvin of the human delegation. His words carried the subtle harmonics that suggested he was speaking from multiple timelines simultaneously. We've identified optimal solutions that will increase prosperity for all participants while eliminating the economic pressures that historically lead to conflict. What he meant was that the humans had restructured the local economy to make competition impossible. Trade routes were assigned rather than negotiated. Resource distribution was managed by algorithms that considered the needs of every species simultaneously. It was perfectly efficient and completely removed the element of choice from economic decisions. General Krax, now serving as the military consultation specialist for his reformed warrior culture, raised one of his forearms. The humans have requested that we provide historical data on pre-war tactical thinking. They want to understand how conflicts develop so they can prevent similar patterns from emerging. The request sounded reasonable, but Thyra understood its true purpose. The humans were studying the psychological and cultural factors that led to warfare so they could edit those factors out of galactic civilization. They weren't just preventing wars. They were making it impossible for future generations to even conceive of warfare as a solution to problems.
Ow!
The research applications are promising, added Dr. Zenth, whose crystalline form now sparkled with new harmonic frequencies. Human technology has enhanced our energy manipulation capabilities by several orders of magnitude. We can now create art forms that exist in dimensions we previously couldn't perceive. This was another aspect of the new order that disturbed Thyra. The humans weren't just controlling galactic civilization. They were improving it, enhancing every species' natural abilities and solving problems that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. It was difficult to oppose beings who were making everyone's lives objectively better. After the meeting, Thyra found herself walking through the observation gardens with Elder Mirth, one of the few beings who seemed to share her concerns about the new order. They're not evil, the elderly philosopher said as they watched human maintenance drones tending to plants that grew in patterns that defied botanical logic. That's what makes this so difficult to process. They genuinely care about our well-being. They want us to be happy and prosperous and safe. But, Thyra prompted, but they've decided what happiness, prosperity, and safety mean for us, Elder Mirth replied. They've taken the burden of choice away from us, and most of our people are grateful for it. No more difficult decisions, no more consequences for poor choices, no more uncertainty about the future. They paused at a viewing platform that looked out over the station's main docking bay. Thousands of ships from hundreds of species moved in perfect harmony, their movements coordinated by human traffic control systems that operated with impossible precision. There were no accidents, no delays, no conflicts between different species. Preferences. It was a masterpiece of organization that eliminated every source of inefficiency or frustration. "Do you remember the old days?" Elder Mirth asked. "When we had to negotiate every trade agreement, and diplomatic missions sometimes failed, when we had to accept that some problems couldn't be solved." Thyra nodded. She remembered the frustration and uncertainty of the old system. But she also remembered the sense of accomplishment when negotiations succeeded, the pride in overcoming challenges through diplomacy and compromise. Those feelings were gone now, replaced by the comfortable numbness of perfect security. "Now the young ones don't understand," Elder Mirth continued. "They see the humans as benevolent gods who've solved all our problems. They don't realize what we've lost in the process." A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Thera activated her personal communicator to find Director Vasquez's image appearing in miniature above her wrist. "Ambassador, we need you. At the Central Command Center immediately. We've detected something that requires your expertise in diplomatic affairs." The journey to Central Command took them through corridors that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the station's original. Architecture should have allowed. Human modifications to the station had improved its efficiency, but they had also made it into something that occasionally hurt to look at directly. The command center was a sphere of pure information, where holographic displays showed data from across the entire galaxy. Director Vasquez stood at the center, her form flickering between solid matter and quantum possibility. She processed information streams that would have overwhelmed most organic minds. "We have a situation," she announced, as Thyra and Elder Mirth arrived. "We've discovered a group of species in the outer galaxy that have been observing our activities. They call themselves the Free Wanderers, and they've been developing technology specifically designed to resist human influence." The main display showed a region of space that human sensors couldn't penetrate clearly. It was fuzzy and distorted, as if someone had learned to hide from reality manipulating technology. "How is that possible?" Thyra asked. "Your technology operates outside normal physics. We've learned to operate outside our version of physics." Director Vasquez replied with something that might have been admiration. "It's quite clever, actually. They've created pocket dimensions that exist according to pre-human physical laws. Our reality anchors can't touch them because they're not technically in our reality." Admiral Steele materialized beside them, his form solidifying from quantum foam. "The Free Wanderers have been recruiting species that are dissatisfied with the new order. They're offering an alternative to human protection, complete independence in exchange for accepting the risks that come with unguided development." "How many species have joined them?" Elder Mirth asked. "Approximately 37 so far," Steele replied. "Most are young species that never experienced the chaos of the old galaxy. They see human guidance as oppression rather than protection. They want the freedom to make their own mistakes." Thyra felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of her admired the Free Wanderers for their courage in opposing humanity's benevolent tyranny. Another part was terrified of what might happen if they succeeded in undermining the new order. "What are you going to do about them?" she asked, dreading the answer. Director Vasquez and Admiral Steele exchanged a look that communicated volumes of information in quantum-encrypted thought patterns. "We're going to offer them exactly what they want," Vasquez said finally. "Complete freedom and independence." Just like that, Thyra couldn't hide her surprise. "The Mercy Protocol isn't about forcing happiness on unwilling recipients," Steele explained. "It's about ensuring that everyone has the choice to be happy. If the Free Wanderers want to face the universe without protection, that's their right. We'll simply make sure their choices don't endanger the species that have chosen security." Over the following weeks, Thyra watched as humanity implemented what they called the Graduated Independence Program. Species that wanted complete freedom were relocated to designated sectors of the galaxy where human technology wouldn't function. They were given advanced resources and wished well in their independent development. The Free Wanderers accepted this arrangement eagerly. Viewing it as a victory over human control, they established their own governments, developed their own technologies, faced their own challenges without human intervention. Some thrived. Others struggled. A few faced extinction-level disasters that they had to solve themselves. A clever solution, Elder Mirth observed as they watched the latest reports from the independent sectors. The humans get to maintain their perfect order while allowing dissatisfied species to leave peacefully. Everyone gets what they want, except it's not really independence, Thyra realized. The humans are still controlling the situation. Just created a controlled environment where independence can exist safely. The truth was both comforting and disturbing. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had created a system where every species could live according to their own values without threatening others. The protected sectors enjoyed perfect peace and prosperity under human guidance. The independent sectors faced genuine freedom and genuine risks without human interference. 5 years after first contact, Thyra stood in her office reviewing the latest Galactic status reports. The galaxy was healthier than it had ever been. Conflicts were practically non-existent. Technological development was accelerating at an unprecedented rate. Art, culture, and philosophy were flourishing under conditions of perfect security. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something essential had been lost. The quarterly satisfaction surveys are in, Commander Jexel reported. 97% of species in the protected sectors report high levels of contentment with the current arrangement. Even in the independent sectors, most species acknowledge that human intervention saved the galaxy from the silence makers. What about the other 3%? Thyra asked. Mostly philosophers and historians who are concerned about long-term implications, Jexel replied. They worry about what will happen to galactic civilization if humanity ever decides to withdraw. Their protection. It was a valid concern. Humanity had become so integral to galactic civilization that their departure would likely cause immediate collapse. The protected species had become dependent on human guidance for everything from resource distribution to conflict resolution. Without that guidance, they would have to relearn skills that had been obsolete for years. Any word from Earth about long-term plans? Thyra asked. Director Vasquez indicated that humanity views their role as permanent, Jexel said carefully. They've made generational commitments to maintaining galactic stability. Their children are being educated specifically for the task of governing a galaxy-spanning civilization. That evening, Thyra received an unexpected visitor. Captain Chen arrived at her quarters, carrying a bottle of something that glowed with soft bioluminescence. Synthetic wine from the agricultural worlds, Chen explained as she poured 2 glasses. The biosymbiotic union has been experimenting with flavor profiles that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's supposed to be quite an experience. They sat by the window watching human patrol ships move through space in their endless vigil against threats that might never come. The wine tasted like starlight and childhood memories, creating sensations that had no names in any known language. Do you ever regret it? Thyra asked, taking responsibility for an entire galaxy. Chen was quiet for a long moment, her expression distant. We didn't choose this responsibility, she said finally. It chose us. When we first detected the silence makers, we realized that our choice was simple. Intervene or watch everything die. Once we made that choice, everything else followed logically. But you could have stopped there, Thyra pointed out. You could have eliminated the threat and withdrawn back to your quarantine. Could we? Chen asked. Once the galaxy knew what we were capable of, how long before someone else called for our help? How long before another extinction-level threat emerged? How long before species started fighting wars specifically to get our attention? She gestured toward the patrol ships. This way, we prevent the problems before they start. We've created a stable system that can last for millions of years. Our children and grandchildren will inherit a galaxy where suffering is optional and extinction is impossible. And freedom? Thyra asked. Is redefined rather than eliminated? Chen replied. Freedom isn't the right to destroy yourself or others. It's the opportunity to become the best version of what you can be. Under human guidance, every species has that opportunity. As the night cycle progressed, Thyra found herself thinking about the nature of mercy. The humans had offered the galaxy exactly what they had promised: complete protection from existential threats. They had delivered safety, prosperity, and peace beyond anything previous generations had imagined possible. The price had been autonomy. But most species considered it a bargain worth making. They had traded the right to fail catastrophically for the guarantee of success within acceptable parameters. They had exchanged the chaos of unguided development for the security of benevolent oversight. Looking back at the historical records, Thyra could see the pattern clearly. Every galactic civilization eventually faced the same choice: grow beyond their ability to control themselves, or accept guidance from those who had already mastered that challenge. Humanity had simply been the first species to develop the technology necessary to provide that guidance effectively. The morning brought news that would have been cause for celebration in the old galaxy: the successful establishment of 3 new colonies in previously uninhabitable systems. Human terraforming technology had converted dead worlds into gardens in a matter of months. The colonists would never know hunger, disease, or want. They would live in perfect harmony with their environment and each other. They would also never know the satisfaction of overcoming hardship through their own efforts, or the pride of building something from nothing without assistance. Those experiences belonged to the past, to a galaxy that had chosen security over struggle. The latest projections from the Planning Committee, Commander Jexel announced as he delivered the daily reports: population growth in the protected sectors is exceeding expectations. The independent sectors are requesting emergency aid for a natural disaster on Krevik Prime. The Free Wanderers are celebrating the 5th anniversary of their independence movement. Thyra noted the irony in that last item. The Free Wanderers were celebrating their independence from a system that allowed them to exist safely outside its boundaries. Even their rebellion had been managed and contained by human foresight. Schedule a meeting with the Wanderer representatives, she decided. I want to understand their perspective on how the galaxy has changed. The meeting took place in neutral space, aboard a station that existed in the boundary zone between protected and independent sectors. The Wanderer delegation was led by Captain Zexel, a young hegemony warrior who had never experienced real warfare. The humans have stolen the galaxy's soul, he declared with the passion of youth. They've turned us into pets in a cosmic zoo, safe, fed, and completely tame. But alive, Thyra pointed out. Before human intervention, we were facing extinction. Death with dignity is preferable to eternal servitude, Zexel replied, though his conviction seemed forced. The old galaxy had meaning because there were real stakes. Everything is predetermined. We go through the motions of civilization, but none of it matters because the humans will fix any problems we create, and in the independent sectors. Thyra asked, do you find the meaning you're looking for? Zexel's expression grew complicated. It's difficult, he admitted. We face real challenges, real dangers. Some of our colonies have failed. We've lost ships to navigational errors that human guidance would have prevented. But when we succeed, the victory is ours alone. The conversation continued for hours, touching on philosophy, politics, and the nature of existence itself. By the end, Thyra understood that the Free Wanderers represented something important, the part of galactic consciousness that refused to accept even benevolent subjugation. We're not asking you to abandon human protection, Zexel said as the meeting concluded. We're asking you to remember what you've given up in exchange for it. Someday, that memory might be important. Returning to her office, Thyra reflected. On the state of the galaxy, humanity had created a masterpiece of organization and care. They had eliminated suffering on a scale that previous generations would have considered impossible. They had built a civilization that could last for geological ages without internal conflict or external threat. But they had also created a galaxy where the grand struggles that had defined civilized existence were now impossible. There would be no more legendary heroes overcoming impossible odds. No more species rising from primitivism to galactic prominence through their own efforts. No more of the magnificent failures and glorious successes that had made history worth recording. The galaxy was safe, but it was also finished in the sense that its story had reached a conclusion. Everything that happened from now on would be a footnote to the chapter that ended with humanity's rise to galactic guardianship. As she prepared her final report on the state of galactic civilization, Thera chose her words carefully. The humans would read her assessment, and their response would be based on what they found there. She wanted to be honest without being critical, acknowledging both the benefits and costs of the new order. The Mercy Protocol has succeeded beyond all expectations, she wrote. Galactic civilization is more stable, prosperous, and secure than at any point in recorded history. The elimination of existential threats has allowed all species to focus on cultural and technological development within safe parameters. She paused, considering her next words carefully. However, the psychological impact of guaranteed security may have unforeseen consequences for future generations. Species that have never faced genuine challenges may lack the resilience necessary to adapt to changing circumstances. The human commitment to permanent guardianship may be essential for maintaining the current system indefinitely. It was as close to criticism as she dared come. The humans had created a system that required their continued involvement to function. Whether that was intentional design or inevitable consequence, it meant that galactic civilization had become permanently dependent on its protectors. The response came within hours, delivered personally by Director Vasquez herself. Your concerns are noted and appreciated, Ambassador, the human said with genuine warmth. We've been monitoring the psychological health of galactic civilization since the implementation of the Accords. You're correct that permanent dependence is a risk we've had to accept. Is there any alternative? Thyra asked. Several, Vasquez replied, but they all involve accepting the return of existential risks. We could gradually withdraw our guidance and allow species to relearn independence. We could create simulation environments where artificial challenges provide the psychological benefits of genuine struggle. We could even relocate willing populations to galaxy edge regions where they could develop naturally without our interference. But you haven't implemented any of these alternatives, because 97% of galactic civilization prefers the current arrangement, Vasquez said. Simply, democracy may be impractical on a galactic scale, but we still respect the will of the majority. When that majority asks for change, we'll provide it. As Director Vasquez departed, Thyra realized that she had witnessed something unprecedented. In galactic history, the willing surrender of self-determination by an entire civilization, the galaxy had collectively chosen safety over sovereignty, security over self-reliance. Whether that choice represented wisdom or cowardice would be debated by future historians. But there was no denying that it had been made freely by species that had experienced the alternative and found it wanting. The age of human guardianship had begun, and it would likely last until the heat death of the universe itself. The galaxy was finally, permanently, and completely safe. Whether it was still alive in any meaningful sense remained to be seen. The end.